In the fog-shrouded valleys of western Virginia, where dawn's first light catches on overgrown fields, stand the decaying ruins of what was once New Harmony, a devout Quaker settlement that vanished without explanation in 1872. Over 350 people simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only hollow structures and a quiet so deep that even now, locals avoid the land after sunset. For more than a century, the Commonwealth of Virginia has kept the official case file under lock and key, hidden in records few have the courage to access. But recently unearthed accounts from a visiting Pennsylvania regulator reveal a reality so terrifying it questions our fundamental understanding of America's pious enclaves. What transpired at New Harmony was not merely a misfortune. It was a 30-year regime of calculated horror masquerading as divine service. Before we reveal the grim reality that officials worked so hard to conceal, I must ask something of you. This channel is not meant for everyone. Only for those with the fortitude to confront the bleakest chapters of American history. If you are among the select few who hunt for these concealed facts, click that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what state you're from. Now, let's journey into the past to see how one clan's avarice twisted a hallowed community into something far more malevolent. What started in 1842 as a bastion of faith and purity would become one of Virginia's most closely guarded mysteries, engineered by a family whose wickedness ran deeper than anyone could fathom. The year was 1842, and a wave of spiritual revival was washing over Virginia like a flood. In this climate of religious passion, New Harmony arose as a refuge for those wishing to live by Quaker ideals, simplicity, pacifism, and separation from a sinful world. The settlement, nestled in the lush Shenandoah Valley not far from Staunton, drew hundreds of converts who gladly gave up their worldly goods for the hope of spiritual purity. At the center of this apparently pious community stood the Blackwood family, whose authority saturated every facet of daily life. Elder Silas Blackwood, an imposing figure with intense blue eyes and a voice that could hold any assembly, had come from Pennsylvania, professing a direct lineage to the original followers of George Fox. His meticulously kept appearance, always clothed in plain but flawless Quaker attire, and his vast knowledge of Quaker doctrine persuaded even doubtful visitors of his legitimacy. His wife, Sister Agnes Blackwood, had publicly denounced their marital bond to uphold Quaker simplicity while privately continuing their union in the seclusion of Silas's enlarged living quarters. Agnes had an almost preternatural gift for discerning people's intentions and anxieties, a talent she used to devastating effect in overseeing the settlement's intricate social workings. Her quiet demeanor and kind grin hid a shrewd intellect that others found both fearsome and compelling. Their family web stretched through the community like the roots of an old tree. Their oldest son, Brother Absalom Blackwood, a sturdy man with his father's commanding aura, ran the settlement's vast farming endeavors. He had turned New Harmony's agriculture from subsistence farming into a profitable business that provided goods to markets all along the James River basin. His younger brother, Brother Josiah Blackwood, acted as the settlement's unofficial head of security, watching members' private talks and mail with an effectiveness that would impress any contemporary intelligence agency. Sister Ruth Blackwood, Silas and Agnes's eldest daughter, supervised the women's residences and the orientation of new converts. At 30, she had never wed and directed what onlookers called powerful nurturing instincts into managing the female members. Her capacity to dismantle psychological barriers and reconstruct personalities according to Blackwood family blueprints was legendary among those who endured her spiritual guidance sessions. The youngest Blackwood daughter, Sister Patience, maintained the settlement's official documents and correspondence. Though just 26, she had a talent for imitation that let her create believable letters in any handwriting. After examining a person's script for merely a few days, her precise bookkeeping built the paper facade that shielded the family's activities from external examination. Silas's brother, Brother Hezekiah Blackwood, controlled the settlement's profitable textile workshops. A master weaver who had learned his craft before the family's corruption started, Hezekiah upheld the quality that made New Harmony fabrics desired throughout Virginia and elsewhere. His workshops employed almost 60 settlement members in what looked like respectable craftwork, but operated more like a compulsory labor camp. Brother Malachi Blackwood, Silas's cousin, ran their successful herb business that supplied homesteads across 4 states. Malachi's regular journeys to far-off clients offered perfect cover for activities that would have appalled his business partners. His mild disposition and clear skill in botanical matters made him a welcome guest at farms from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, where his true aims stayed carefully hidden. Agnes's sister, Sister Esther Webb, managed the settlement's food preparation and distribution. Her command over nourishment let the family reward obedience and penalize dissent in ways that seemed natural to outside observers. Esther had researched the impacts of different plants and compounds. Knowledge she used with scientific exactness to manage the community's mental and physical state. Even the wider family had vital parts. Silas's aged mother, Mother Beatrice Blackwood, served as a living emblem of the settlement's purported spiritual legitimacy. Her presence gave credibility to Silas's claims of long-standing Quaker ties, while her seeming fragility made her an improbable suspect in any misconduct. In truth, Mother Beatrice was the family's strategic genius whose years of practice in control guided their extended planning. Brother Levi Blackwood, Silas's youngest brother, handled the settlement's external relations with nearby officials and neighboring towns. His charm and apparent honesty had persuaded Sheriff John Peterson of Augusta County that New Harmony was an exemplary religious community worthy of protection and support. Levi's regular contributions to local churches and community groups purchased goodwill that proved essential when queries emerged about the settlement's operations. The settlement's fame spread throughout Virginia and beyond. Visitors admired the immaculate structures built with materials bought through the settlement's lawful business earnings. The perfectly arranged gardens tended by members who labored from sunrise to sunset yielded vegetables and medicinal plants that supplied both the settlement's needs and commercial markets. The apparent satisfaction of the nearly 450 members impressed even skeptical visitors who noticed no clear indications of force or mistreatment. What outsiders couldn't see was the complex network of observation and command the Blackwood family had spun throughout New Harmony. Every element of settlement life passed through family members who reported straight to Silas and Agnes during their nightly planning meetings. No choice, however minor, happened without Blackwood approval. No member could depart the grounds without a Blackwood family escort, and even short visits to nearby Staunton needed detailed justification and close monitoring. The family had built what modern experts would identify as an ideal authoritarian setting. Information moved only downward from the leadership, while surveillance guaranteed that any dissent was swiftly spotted and handled. The settlement's seclusion, both physical and mental, made resistance appear not just hopeless, but unthinkable to most members. New converts went through a meticulously planned indoctrination process that erased their former identities and rebuilt their psyches according to Blackwood specifications. This procedure, managed mainly by Ruth and Agnes Blackwood, usually required 7 months to finish. By its conclusion, new members had been mentally reshaped into obedient followers who saw questioning the family's power as equivalent to questioning God's own will. The settlement's daily schedule strengthened this control at every step. Members woke at 4 o'clock each morning to the sound of Brother Josiah's bell, ate breakfast made under Esther Webb's supervision, and passed their days at appointed chores that had been deliberately crafted to prevent private discussions or independent thought. Evening worship services led by Silas Blackwood with different family members in supporting parts blended authentic spiritual components with subtle mental manipulation that reinforced reliance and deterred critical thinking. The first fracture in New Harmony's perfect exterior appeared on a bitter January morning in 1850 when Brother Jacob Mueller, a prosperous merchant who had contributed his whole fortune to the settlement 3 years prior, started raising awkward questions about the settlement's finances during a public gathering. Brother Jacob had come to New Harmony in 1847 as one of the settlement's first and most generous converts. A widower in his 50s whose family had perished in a typhoid epidemic, he had found solace in the Quaker promise of spiritual kinship and eternal meaning. His donation of a thriving mercantile business and considerable real estate had supplied much of the capital that let the Blackwood family establish their operations on such a large scale. For 3 years, Jacob had been the ideal settlement member. He worked without rest in Brother Absalom's farming operations, acted as a guide to younger converts, and never challenged the leadership's decisions. His change from successful businessman to humble Quaker brother amazed visitors and strengthened the settlement's reputation for spiritual authenticity. But Jacob's commercial background made him uniquely equipped to spot inconsistencies that escaped other members' notice. His trained eye for financial particulars combined with his access to certain operational records through his farming work slowly uncovered discrepancies that troubled his spirit. The herb business profits reported by Brother Malachi didn't match the sums Jacob had witnessed during his trips to client farms. The textile workshop incomes seemed implausibly high considering the number of bolts he saw being produced. Most confusing of all, the settlement's membership figures didn't align with the consumption logs he kept for provisions and materials. Friends and brethren, Jacob stated during the monthly settlement meeting, his worn hands clutching several sheets of carefully computed numbers. I have been praying over concerns that burden my heart. Our blessed settlement has thrived beyond calculation. Yet I perceive contradictions in our records that trouble my soul. The quiet that followed was overwhelming. Around the filled meeting hall, Blackwood family members traded looks that lasted mere moments but communicated much. Silas Blackwood's face stayed calm. His hands folded serenely in his lap. But those who knew him well detected the slight tightening around his eyes. Sister Agnes's gentle smile didn't falter. Yet her knuckles whitened as she gripped her prayer book with growing pressure. The herb business, Jacob continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his subject. Brother Malachi reported earnings of $950 from Pennsylvania clients last quarter. But when I delivered goods to those same farms, I computed sales that should have yielded nearly $1,300. Where has this missing money gone? Brother Josiah Blackwood rose from his seat near the entrance, apparently to check the room's temperature, but his movement placed him between Jacob and the exit. Sister Ruth's eyes never left Jacob's face, recording every expression and gesture for later study. Around the room, other Blackwood family members made slight adjustments to their positions, forming a nearly invisible web of observation and command. Furthermore, Jacob pressed on, apparently unaware of the perilous ground he was entering. Our membership rolls show 450 souls, yet our food usage suggests we're feeding hardly 280. Brother Hezekiah's textile workshops claim to employ 60 members, but I count only 42 who regularly report for that duty. These numbers don't align. And as stewards of God's provision, shouldn't we insist on accuracy in our accounting? The reply came not from Silas, but from Mother Beatrice Blackwood, whose elderly voice carried surprising authority across the silent hall. "Brother Jacob," she said, her tone mixing gentle correction with clear warning, "your concerns reveal a heart still bound to worldly thinking. In our blessed settlement, we trust that our leaders, guided by heavenly wisdom, handle all earthly matters for our spiritual benefit. Perhaps you need time for prayer and contemplation to conquer these doubts that trouble your faith." Silas Blackwood nodded gravely, his expression radiating fatherly concern for a straying child. "Brother Jacob, your dedication to our settlement's welfare touches my heart deeply. But perhaps your mind has been clouded by memories of your former worldly existence. Sister Esther, would you make Brother Jacob some of your special peppermint tea? I believe he needs rest and reflection to clear his thoughts of these troubling concerns." The meeting continued for another hour, but Jacob Mueller's questions had fundamentally changed the atmosphere. Other members avoided eye contact with him, suddenly finding pressing reasons to examine their prayer books or adjust their clothing. The Blackwood family's responses to subsequent business items carried an underlying tension that hadn't existed before Jacob's intervention. That evening, Jacob was found dead in his dormitory bed by Sister Ruth, who discovered the body during her routine evening inspection of the men's quarters. Her sorrowful announcement to the gathered settlement painted a picture of peaceful passing. Brother Jacob passed gently in his sleep, called home by the Lord after confessing his sin of doubt during evening prayers. His final words were an apology for permitting worldly worries to cloud his spiritual sight. The settlement accepted this explanation with the resigned faith they'd been conditioned to embrace. After all, questioning the leadership's account of events was tantamount to questioning God's plan. Brother Jacob's funeral the next day became a lesson about the perils of allowing commercial concerns to interfere with spiritual submission. But young Sister Clara Dixon, who cleaned the dormitories each morning, noticed details that would haunt her for decades. When she entered Jacob's room to prepare it for cleaning, she was struck by the bitter almond scent that lingered despite the room's windows being open all night. Jacob's fingernails had turned a distinct bluish tint that she'd never seen on any corpse, including her own grandmother, who had died peacefully at home. Most disturbing of all, she discovered traces of white foam around Jacob's mouth that Sister Ruth had carefully wiped away before calling for help. Clara watched in mounting horror as Brother Josiah Blackwood collected all of Jacob's personal papers, including the financial calculations that had started the crisis. These documents, along with Jacob's ledger books and correspondence, were burned in the communal fireplace that very night during what Silas Blackwood described as a cleansing ceremony to purge worldly attachments from our sacred space. The settlement's reaction revealed how thoroughly the Blackwoods controlled information flow and emotional responses. Within hours of Jacob's death, Sister Agnes was leading prayer circles where members confessed their own doubts and worldly thoughts, creating an atmosphere where questioning leadership became synonymous with spiritual failure. Brother Absalom organized intensive work details that kept potential questioners busy from dawn to dusk, leaving no time for private conversations or independent reflection. Brother Hezekiah led evening discussions about the dangers of challenging spiritual authority, using Jacob as a cautionary tale of what happened when faith wavered and worldly concerns corrupted pure hearts. These sessions, which became a regular feature of settlement life, served the dual purpose of preventing future dissent while identifying members whose responses suggested they might harbor similar doubts. The most chilling aspect of the settlement's response was how swiftly Jacob Mueller's memory was systematically erased. His personal belongings were redistributed within days. His work assignments transferred to other members and his name removed from settlement records except for a brief death notice. Within a month, it was as if Brother Jacob had never existed at all. His questions forgotten and his concerns dismissed as the ravings of a mind corrupted by worldly attachment. In the months following Jacob Mueller's death, a pattern began to emerge that would continue for over 2 decades, growing more sophisticated and ruthless with each iteration. Members who asked probing questions about finances, who expressed desire to visit family outside the settlement, or who showed signs of wanting to leave New Harmony, began experiencing what the Blackwoods termed spiritual crisis, requiring special intervention. Brother Hezekiah Blackwood developed what became known as the retreat system for handling dissent. When someone questioned settlement practices or showed signs of independence, they would be assigned to special prayer and fasting retreats in isolated cabins scattered across the settlement's extensive property. These retreats, always supervised by various Blackwood family members, were presented as opportunities for troubled souls to reconnect with divine purpose through solitude and meditation. The retreat cabins constructed under Brother Hezekiah's direction in remote corners of the settlement's thousands of acres were designed to appear rustic and spiritual while serving their true purpose as holding facilities. Each cabin contained a single room with basic furniture, heavy wooden shutters that could be barred from outside, and doors that locked only from the exterior. The cabin's isolated locations connected to the main settlement only by narrow paths through dense woods ensured that any sounds from within would never reach other members. Brother Josiah Blackwood managed the logistics of identifying retreat candidates. His network of informants throughout the settlement reported private conversations, observed relationships, and monitored correspondence for signs of disloyalty or independent thinking. His methods were so subtle that most members never realized they were being watched, attributing chance encounters with Josiah to coincidence rather than systematic surveillance. The selection process for retreats followed carefully developed criteria. Recent converts who asked too many questions about absent family members were prime candidates, as were longer-term members who showed signs of developing leadership potential that might threaten Blackwood authority. Members who demonstrated excessive attachment to possessions they had donated, who expressed homesickness during settlement meetings, or who formed close friendships that might enable organized resistance, also found themselves selected for spiritual intervention. Sister Esther Webb managed the settlement's correspondence with remarkable sophistication, ensuring that worried family members received carefully crafted letters explaining their loved ones' sudden departures or deaths. Her penmanship was flawless, and she had studied each member's writing style with scientific precision, enabling her to forge convincing final letters that would satisfy distant relatives for years to come. Esther's forgery operation required extensive preparation and planning. She maintained detailed files on each settlement member's background, including samples of their handwriting, information about distant relatives, and knowledge of their pre-conversion lives that could be referenced in false correspondence. When someone was selected for elimination, Esther would prepare multiple letters to be sent over several months, creating the illusion of an ongoing correspondence that gradually explained the person's absence. Parents in Maryland received touching notes from children they would never see again, describing spiritual revelations that called them to missionary work in untamed Western territories. Siblings in New York got detailed accounts of peaceful deaths following brief illnesses, complete with descriptions of final words and burial ceremonies that never occurred. The letters were masterpieces of emotional manipulation designed to provide closure while discouraging further inquiry. Brother Malachi Blackwood's herb business provided perfect cover for disposing of evidence and maintaining the settlement's external relationships. His monthly trips to distant farms offered opportunities to bury bodies in remote locations across Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina, while simultaneously conducting legitimate business that reinforced his reputation as a trustworthy merchant and devout Quaker brother. Malachi's routes were carefully planned to serve multiple purposes. His legitimate customers provided alibis for his presence in distant locations, while his knowledge of remote farm properties gained through years of business relationships enabled him to identify burial sites that would never be discovered. He developed relationships with isolated farmers who welcomed his visits and never questioned his occasional requests to camp overnight on their property during bad weather. The disposal process was methodical and efficient. Bodies were transported in specially modified herb wagons that appeared to contain normal agricultural supplies but included hidden compartments designed for their grisly cargo. Malachi's reputation for punctuality and reliability meant that his overnight absences during trips were never questioned by customers who assumed he was maintaining his demanding schedule. Local authorities, when they occasionally inquired about missing persons, were shown immaculate records maintained by Sister Patience Blackwood. Her documentation system was a marvel of bureaucratic deception, demonstrating through carefully crafted paperwork that individuals had left voluntarily for other communities or had died of natural causes with proper burial in the settlement cemetery. Patience's record-keeping extended far beyond simple membership logs. She maintained detailed medical histories that could explain sudden deaths from natural causes, travel documentation that supported claims about members departing for distant communities, and correspondence files that included both genuine letters and Esther's forgeries. Her organizational skills ensured that any official inquiry could be answered with convincing documentation that withstood casual scrutiny. The psychological control the Blackwood family maintained was perhaps more chilling than their physical crimes. They had created a closed system where questioning authority was equated with spiritual failure, where blind obedience was the highest virtue, and where members policed each other's thoughts and behaviors. The remaining settlement members weren't just victims. They had been transformed into unwitting accomplices in their own oppression. The settlement's population remained steady at around 450 members despite the constant stream of new converts arriving monthly and the mysterious disappearances that occurred with increasing frequency. This stability was maintained through what Brother Josiah privately called natural selection, the systematic removal of anyone who posed a threat to family control, balanced by aggressive recruitment of new converts whose property donations financed the operation's expansion. New arrivals were carefully screened by the Blackwood women, who had developed sophisticated methods for identifying potential troublemakers before they could influence other members. Sister Ruth's intake interviews conducted under the guise of spiritual counseling actually served to assess each convert's psychological profile, family connections, and potential value to the settlement. Those deemed dangerous were marked for early elimination while valuable converts underwent intensive indoctrination designed to strip away their previous identities. The indoctrination process refined over years of practice combined genuine spiritual elements with systematic psychological abuse that created trauma bonds between victims and their abusers. New converts were isolated from contact with the outside world while being subjected to alternating periods of intense attention and deliberate neglect that broke down their psychological defenses and made them desperate for approval from settlement leaders. By 1865, New Harmony operated like a well-oiled machine of exploitation. Its various components working together with mechanical precision that would have impressed any efficiency expert. The Blackwood family had refined their methods over 23 years of practice, transforming what had begun as opportunistic crimes into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that generated enormous profits while maintaining an impeccable public reputation. The family's division of labor had evolved into a complex organizational structure that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. Silas Blackwood maintained his role as spiritual leader and public face of the settlement, delivering inspiring sermons that drew new converts regularly while keeping existing members focused on heavenly rewards rather than earthly concerns. His charismatic presence had become legendary throughout Virginia's religious communities, with ministers from other denominations frequently citing New Harmony as an example of successful Christian living. Agnes Blackwood had developed what amounted to a science of psychological manipulation, studying each settlement member with the intensity of a naturalist observing specimens. Her methods for breaking down individual resistance and rebuilding personalities according to family specifications had become so refined that the process typically took only 4 to 5 months to complete. She maintained detailed psychological profiles on every member, updating them regularly based on observations from her network of female relatives and informants. The settlement's expansion had enabled more sophisticated criminal operations that generated multiple revenue streams. Brother Absalom Blackwood's agricultural operations now supplied produce to markets in Richmond, Charlottesville, and Baltimore, generating enormous profits that never appeared in the books shown to members. His workforce of unpaid settlement members maintained through psychological coercion rather than physical restraint provided labor costs that made New Harmony farms impossibly profitable compared to conventional operations. Brother Hezekiah Blackwood's textile workshops had similarly expanded, producing fabrics that were sold throughout the James River Basin and marketed as authentic Quaker craftsmanship. The quality remained high because Hezekiah genuinely understood weaving, but the labor was essentially slavery disguised as religious devotion. His workers put in 12 to 14-hour days producing textiles that sold for premium prices, with profits flowing entirely to the Blackwood family's private accounts. The most insidious development was how the family had begun selling settlement members to buyers who operated plantations and industrial facilities throughout the South and Midwest. This human trafficking operation, coordinated primarily by Brother Malachi during his herb business travels, provided the highest profit margins of any family enterprise while explaining the mysterious disappearances that might otherwise have attracted unwanted attention. The selection process for trafficking victims followed coldly calculated criteria. Younger members with valuable skills but dangerous independent tendencies were prime candidates, as were individuals whose family connections made their continued presence at New Harmony potentially problematic. The buyers who believed they were purchasing indentured servants rather than free citizens paid substantial sums for workers who came with fabricated documentation proving their voluntary servitude. Sister Ruth Blackwood had become the family's specialist in breaking down new converts and identifying those suitable for different faiths. Her psychological assessment process, disguised as spiritual counseling, enabled her to categorize newcomers into groups: valuable long-term assets who would remain at New Harmony, potential trafficking victims who could be sold for profit, and dangerous individuals who needed immediate elimination. Ruth's methods combined genuine spiritual guidance with systematic abuse that created powerful trauma bonds between victims and their abusers. She had studied the conversion experiences of legitimate Quaker communities, then perverted these techniques to serve the family's criminal purposes. Her sessions left converts psychologically dependent on her approval while stripping away their connections to previous identities and relationships. The settlement's isolation had become both geographical and psychological, with members existing in a closed information environment where the Blackwood family controlled every source of knowledge and interpretation. Located on thousands of acres of family-controlled land, members rarely encountered outsiders except during carefully supervised visits to nearby towns. Even these excursions were managed by Blackwood family members who monitored all interactions and reported any conversations that suggested disloyalty. The family had cultivated extensive relationships with local authorities that provided protection from official scrutiny. Sheriff John Peterson of Augusta County had become essentially a paid ally, receiving regular donations to his campaign funds and personal accounts in exchange for his assumption that New Harmony was a model religious community deserving protection rather than investigation. These relationships extended throughout the region's power structure. Brother Levi Blackwood's charm offensive had won allies among local merchants, politicians, and religious leaders who viewed New Harmony as a valuable economic and spiritual asset to their communities. The settlement's legitimate business operations provided substantial tax revenue and employment opportunities that made local officials reluctant to investigate rumors or complaints. The psychological control mechanisms had evolved to include elaborate rituals and ceremonies that reinforced member dependency while identifying potential dissidents. Silas Blackwood's worship services combined authentic Quaker elements with subtle psychological manipulation that created altered states of consciousness where critical thinking became impossible. These services often lasted for hours, leaving participants emotionally drained and psychologically vulnerable to suggestion. Evening confession sessions led by various Blackwood family members served multiple purposes beyond spiritual guidance. They provided opportunities to identify members harboring doubts or resentments, created public pressure for conformity through shame and guilt, and enabled the family to gather intelligence about private conversations and relationships that might threaten their control. The confession process had become increasingly elaborate with different family members specializing in extracting specific types of information. Sister Ruth focused on relationships and emotional attachments that might enable resistance, while Brother Josiah concentrated on practical concerns like escape plans or contact with outside authorities. Sister Esther monitored confessions for information about family members outside the settlement who might become problematic if they began asking questions. Mother Beatrice Blackwood, despite her apparent frailty, had emerged as the family's strategic mastermind, whose decades of experience in manipulation guided their long-term planning. Her ability to appear harmless while orchestrating complex criminal operations had become legendary among family members who referred to her privately as the General, in recognition of her tactical brilliance. Beatrice's influence extended to every aspect of the operation, from the selection of new territories for expansion to the development of new techniques for psychological control. Her understanding of human nature gained through 70 years of observing and manipulating others enabled her to predict how individuals would respond to various pressures and rewards. Her strategic vision had transformed the family's criminal enterprise from opportunistic theft into a sustainable business model that could theoretically continue indefinitely. The expansion of their operations had required increasingly sophisticated methods for maintaining security and preventing exposure. The family had developed elaborate communication systems that enabled coordination across their various enterprises while minimizing the risk of interception by hostile parties. They used coded language in their correspondence, maintained separate financial accounts for different operations, and created false identities that could be used if rapid escape became necessary. The beginning of the end for the Blackwood family's 30-year reign of terror came from an unexpected source. Their own success had attracted attention from the legitimate Quaker leadership in Pennsylvania. In late 1871, the Pennsylvania Society of Friends decided to send Elder Benjamin Croft, one of their most experienced and respected leaders, to evaluate New Harmony for potential inclusion in their formal network of authenticated Quaker settlements. Elder Croft was not the typical visitor the Blackwoods were accustomed to managing. A genuine follower of George Fox's teachings who had spent 45 years in Quaker communities across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, he possessed an intimate knowledge of proper Quaker practices, record-keeping, and community structure that made him nearly impossible to deceive. His mission was to verify that New Harmony truly followed authentic Quaker principles before recommending them for official recognition and inclusion in the society's collective decision-making processes. The evaluation request had come after years of glowing reports about New Harmony's spiritual achievements and economic success. The Pennsylvania leadership had been impressed by accounts of the settlement's growth, their reputation for quality craftsmanship, and their apparent success in maintaining simplicity and pacifism over more than 2 decades. The decision to send Croft represented both an honor and a potentially devastating threat to the Blackwood family's carefully constructed facade. Silas Blackwood initially welcomed the evaluation with apparent enthusiasm, confident that his family's carefully constructed facade would fool another religious leader. After all, they had successfully deceived hundreds of visitors over the years, including ministers from other denominations who had left New Harmony convinced of its spiritual authenticity. The family's experience in managing inspections had given them confidence that they could control the process and manipulate Croft's conclusions. But Croft's first requests immediately raised alarm bells throughout the Blackwood network. Unlike previous visitors who were content with guided tours and carefully staged demonstrations of settlement life, Croft wanted to examine financial records going back to the settlement's founding in 1842. He insisted on speaking privately with randomly selected members without Blackwood family supervision or preparation. Most troubling of all, he brought his own accounting ledgers and expected to reconcile New Harmony's reported membership numbers with their consumption records, work output, and correspondence logs. The scope of Croft's investigation became clear during his first meeting with Silas Blackwood. Conducted in the settlement's main meeting hall before an audience of senior members. "Brother Silas," Croft said in his quiet but authoritative voice, "the Pennsylvania Society has developed standardized procedures for evaluating potential member settlements. We'll need to review your membership rolls, financial records, correspondence files, and burial registers for the past 5 years. We'll also need to conduct private interviews with at least 50 members selected through random drawing." Silas's response revealed the first crack in his usually perfect composure. "Elder Croft, we are honored by your visit and eager to demonstrate our commitment to the Friend's teachings. However, our record-keeping follows Virginia practices that may differ from Pennsylvania standards. Perhaps we could arrange a more informal evaluation that better reflects our unique circumstances." Croft's expression remained pleasant but firm. "I appreciate your regional considerations, Brother Silas, but the Society's standards apply equally to all settlements regardless of location. Authentic Quaker practices are universal, not subject to regional variation. We'll begin with the membership rolls and burial registers tomorrow morning." That evening, the Blackwood family held an emergency meeting in Silas's private quarters, their voices hushed, but their panic evident to anyone who might have been listening. Mother Beatrice Blackwood, despite her apparent frailty, took charge of the strategy session with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis. "This man knows things we can't fake," she whispered urgently. "He's asking for documentation we can't provide without exposing everything. We need to delay, deflect, and if necessary, eliminate the threat before he completes his investigation." Brother Malachi Blackwood was the first to articulate the scope of their vulnerability. "He's asking for records going back 5 years, but our problems go back much further. The membership numbers alone will expose us. Our books show 450 members, but we've got maybe 280 actually living here. The burial registers are even worse. We've got graves for people who supposedly left for other communities." Sister Esther Webb added another terrifying dimension to their predicament. He's already identified inconsistencies in the correspondence I've been maintaining with other communities. He knows Quaker writing conventions I never learned. And he's asking questions about Fox's teachings that our people can't answer because they were never properly instructed. The family's initial attempts to delay and deflect Croft's investigation only intensified his suspicions and strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth. When they claimed certain records were stored in a building that had been damaged by recent storms, he pointed out that none of the buildings showed signs of weather damage. When they suggested interviewing specific members who could vouch for settlement practices, he insisted on selecting interview subjects himself through random drawing from a complete membership list. Brother Josiah Blackwood's surveillance network, so effective at monitoring settlement members, proved useless against an investigator who understood the importance of maintaining operational security. Croft varied his routines, conducted interviews in different locations, and seemed to possess an intuitive awareness of when he was being watched. His questions during member interviews revealed a depth of knowledge about authentic Quaker practices that made it impossible to maintain their deceptions. Most dangerously, some of the settlement's surviving members began responding to Croft's genuine spiritual presence in ways that terrified the Blackwood family. Sister Clara Dixon, who had witnessed Brother Jacob Mueller's suspicious death over 20 years earlier, found herself drawn to Croft's obvious authenticity and began sharing her long-suppressed observations about members who had mysteriously disappeared. The psychological effect of Croft's presence on settlement members was profound and immediate. For the first time in decades, they encountered someone whose spiritual authority didn't depend on fear, manipulation, or psychological abuse. His gentle questions about their experiences, his obvious knowledge of authentic Quaker practices, and his genuine concern for their spiritual welfare created an atmosphere where long-buried doubts and memories began to surface. Brother Hezekiah Blackwood, whose textile workshops provided crucial income for the family's operations, found his workers becoming increasingly unproductive as they spent time talking with Croft about traditional Quaker craftsmanship techniques they had never been taught. The conversations revealed gaps in their knowledge that made it obvious they weren't receiving proper instruction in authentic methods. Sister Ruth Blackwood's carefully controlled dormitory system began breaking down as female members started asking questions about Quaker practices they'd never heard of before Croft's arrival. Her authority, so absolute for so many years, suddenly seemed questionable when compared to the obvious authenticity of their visitors' spiritual knowledge and gentle demeanor. The investigation took a decisive turn when Croft requested access to the settlement cemetery for a private memorial service honoring departed members. The Blackwood family couldn't refuse such a reasonable request without appearing suspicious, but they also couldn't allow him to examine the burial grounds too closely without risking exposure of their crimes. Brother Josiah volunteered to escort Croft to the cemetery, hoping to control what he observed and limit his time among the graves. But Croft's trained eye immediately noticed inconsistencies that had escaped casual observers for decades. The burial patterns didn't match the death dates in official records, and the condition of grave markers suggested many more interments than the documented deaths could account for. Brother Josiah, Croft said quietly as they stood among the headstones, "I noticed some irregularities in your burial records. This grave marker indicates Brother William died in 1865, but your correspondence files show letters from him dated 1866. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Josiah's response revealed the desperation that was beginning to infect the entire family. "Elder Croft, perhaps there was an error in our record-keeping. Our sister Patience maintains extensive files, but even the most careful record-keeper can make mistakes when dealing with so many settlement members over so many years." Croft's expression remained thoughtful, but skeptical. I understand that record-keeping can be challenging, but Quaker settlements traditionally maintain extremely accurate documentation of deaths and departures. The inconsistencies I'm observing suggest systematic problems rather than occasional errors. That night, Croft made a discovery that would expose the full scope of the Blackwood family's crimes and bring their 30-year reign of terror to an end. On the night of April 10, 1872, Elder Croft made a discovery that would expose the full scope of the Blackwood family's 30-year reign of terror. Unable to sleep due to his growing suspicions about the discrepancies he had uncovered during 3 weeks of investigation, he decided to examine the settlement cemetery by moonlight, hoping to reconcile burial records with actual grave sites without Blackwood family supervision. What he found was a graveyard that told two completely different stories. The official cemetery maintained for visitors and official inspections contained approximately 50 graves with proper headstones dating from 1842 to 1872. The markers were well crafted, obviously expensive, and arranged in neat rows that suggested careful planning and maintenance. But Croft's trained eye, sharpened by decades of experience managing authentic Quaker communities, noticed inconsistencies in the ground itself that revealed a far more sinister reality. Areas throughout the cemetery showed subtle depressions and variations in soil color that suggested many more burials than the headstones indicated. The earth in these unmarked sections had been disturbed and allowed to settle, forming barely perceptible indentations that would escape casual observation, but were obvious to someone who understood how burial grounds evolved over time. The vegetation patterns also revealed the truth. Certain areas supported different plant growth than others, indicating soil that had been repeatedly disturbed and replaced. More chilling still, when he examined the dated graves more carefully, Croft realized that many of the supposed death dates corresponded exactly with his list of members who had allegedly left New Harmony to found new communities or visit distant relatives. The timeline was impossible. How could someone die and be buried at New Harmony on the same day they were reported to have departed for Pennsylvania or North Carolina? His systematic examination of each grave marker revealed a pattern of deception so elaborate that it demonstrated years of careful planning. Members who had supposedly died of natural causes were buried next to those who had allegedly left for missionary work in distant territories. The dates formed a chronicle of systematic elimination that coincided perfectly with moments when the settlement faced potential exposure or internal resistance. Croft's investigation was interrupted by Sister Clara Dixon, who had been watching from her dormitory window and recognized an opportunity to finally reveal the truth she had carried for over 20 years. Moving silently through the darkness, she approached the cemetery with the desperate courage of someone who knew this might be her only chance to expose the horrors she had witnessed. "Elder Croft," she whispered urgently as she approached his lantern-lit figure among the gravestones. "God has sent you to reveal the truth we've been too terrified to speak. What you're seeing here is only a small part of what the Blackwood family has done to this settlement." In a conversation conducted in hushed tones among the silent graves, Clara revealed the horrifying truth she had carried in terrified silence for decades. "I've seen them bury people in the middle of the night," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed terror and long-awaited relief. "The Blackwood family, they don't just control this settlement. They've been systematically murdering anyone who threatens their power or questions their authority." Clara's testimony, delivered in broken whispers as they crouched between headstones to avoid detection, painted a picture of systematic elimination that went far beyond occasional murders to maintain control. The Blackwood family had created what amounted to a death camp disguised as a religious settlement where members who questioned finances, expressed homesickness, showed leadership potential, or simply became inconvenient were systematically eliminated. The retreat system, Clara explained, her eyes darting nervously toward the main settlement buildings. They send people to isolated cabins for spiritual reflection, but they never return. Brother Malachi takes them away in his herb wagons during his business trips. We never see them again. Clara's description of Brother Jacob Mueller's death in 1850 provided Croft with the smoking gun he needed to understand the full scope of the family's crimes. Her account of the bitter almond smell, the blue fingernails, and the white foam around Jacob's mouth suggested poisoning with a substance Croft recognized from his medical studies. The systematic destruction of Jacob's financial records and the careful erasure of his memory from settlement history demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication that went far beyond spontaneous violence. Most chilling of all was Clara's description of the settlement's psychological control mechanisms. "They've turned us into our own jailers," she whispered, tears streaming down her face in the moonlight. "We watch each other, report private conversations, and believe that questioning them is the same as questioning God. They've created a world where the truth seems like sin and obedience feels like salvation." Croft's mind raced as he processed Clara's revelations against the background of his own observations. The settlement's population numbers, the financial inconsistencies, the burial records, and now Clara's eyewitness testimony formed a pattern of criminal enterprise so vast and sophisticated that it seemed almost unbelievable. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. "I need to get this information to the authorities immediately," Croft said, his voice tight with urgency. "But I can't risk alerting the Blackwoods. They've clearly maintained this operation for decades by eliminating anyone who threatened exposure." Clara's response revealed the depth of her desperation and the extent of her knowledge about the family's methods. "You can't trust anyone in the settlement, Elder Croft. The Blackwoods have informants everywhere. Even members who seem sympathetic might be reporting directly to them. You need to leave tonight, right now, before they realize what you've discovered." Croft hesitated, torn between his duty to protect the remaining settlement members and the urgent need to bring the Blackwoods to justice. "But what about you, Sister Clara? What will they do to you if they realize you've spoken with me?" A strange calm settled over Clara's features as she answered. "I've lived with this terror for more than half my life, Elder Croft. If my testimony can finally stop them, then whatever happens to me will be worth it. But you need to go now. Brother Josiah's men patrol the perimeter every hour. You have maybe 20 minutes before the next patrol reaches this area." Croft made his decision with the speed born of genuine crisis. "Come with me, Sister Clara. We'll leave together and bring back the authorities. You shouldn't have to face them alone." But Clara shook her head, her expression resolute despite her obvious fear. "If we both disappear, they'll know something is wrong and might destroy evidence or harm other members. You go. I'll stay and pretend everything is normal. Just promise me you'll bring help quickly." Croft's escape from New Harmony that night became the stuff of local legend. Moving with the silence and speed of someone who understood the stakes, he avoided the settlement's patrols, found his horse where it was stabled near the main entrance, and rode through the darkness toward Staunton, 15 miles away. His journey through unfamiliar territory in pitch darkness would have been impossible for anyone less determined or less familiar with rural travel. He reached the Augusta County Sheriff's Office just as dawn was breaking over the Blue Ridge Mountains. His appearance, covered in mud, his clothing torn from pushing through dense undergrowth, combined with his obvious distress immediately alerted the night deputy that something serious had occurred. Within minutes, Sheriff John Peterson was listening to Croft's incredible story, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to horrified belief as Croft presented evidence that couldn't be explained away as misunderstandings or record-keeping errors. The sheriff's response revealed both his professional competence and his personal connection to the case. Elder Croft, I've known the Blackwoods for 20 years. They've always been model citizens as far as I could tell. But what you're describing, if even half of it is true, this is the worst crime in Virginia history. Croft's evidence was overwhelming even without Clara's testimony. The burial ground inconsistencies, the financial records showing massive discrepancies between reported and actual membership, the correspondence forgeries, and the systematic pattern of disappearances going back decades formed an undeniable pattern of criminal enterprise. Most damning of all were the membership rolls that showed hundreds of people who had supposedly left New Harmony but whose departure dates corresponded exactly with burial records at the settlement. Sheriff Peterson organized what would become the largest law enforcement operation in Virginia history up to that time. By noon on April 11, 1872, over 50 armed deputies and volunteers were riding toward New Harmony with arrest warrants for every Blackwood family member and search warrants for every building on the property. The scale of the operation reflected Peterson's understanding that they were dealing with potentially dangerous suspects who had maintained a criminal enterprise for 30 years through systematic violence and psychological manipulation. What the authorities found when they reached New Harmony would haunt the investigators for the rest of their lives and create a mystery that remains officially unsolved to this day. The settlement appeared normal at first glance, with members going about their daily chores and Blackwood family members conducting business as usual. But as the law enforcement contingent spread through the property, they discovered that the family had prepared for this eventuality with the same meticulous planning that had characterized their criminal operations. The Blackwood family members were gone. Every single one of them had vanished without leaving any obvious evidence of their destination or method of escape. Their personal quarters had been stripped of all identifying documents, financial records, and personal effects. The settlement's main office, which should have contained decades of records, had been systematically cleaned out, with only empty filing cabinets and bare shelves remaining. Even more disturbing was the condition of the remaining settlement members. Without the Blackwood family's psychological control, they were completely disoriented, unable to function independently, and largely incapable of providing coherent information about what had happened. Their conditioning had been so thorough that the removal of their abusers left them psychologically adrift, unable to comprehend a world where the Blackwoods didn't control every aspect of their existence. Sister Clara Dixon was among the missing. Her dormitory bed showed signs of having been slept in, but her personal belongings were gone, and none of the other members could provide any information about her whereabouts. The authorities initially assumed the Blackwoods had taken her as a hostage or killed her to prevent her testimony, but no evidence supporting either theory was ever found. The investigation that followed would become one of the most extensive in 19th-century American history, involving law enforcement agencies from 3 states and federal authorities. The evidence gathered from the settlement, though incomplete, painted a horrifying picture of systematic criminal enterprise on a scale that seemed almost unbelievable. Forensic examination of the cemetery revealed at least 200 unmarked graves containing human remains, many showing evidence of violent death or poisoning. The settlement's financial records, reconstructed from fragmentary evidence and testimony from business partners, showed that the Blackwood family had amassed a fortune equivalent to over $5 million in contemporary currency through their various criminal enterprises. Most chilling of all was the evidence of psychological manipulation that emerged during interviews with the remaining settlement members. Their descriptions of life under Blackwood control revealed a system of abuse so sophisticated that it anticipated techniques that wouldn't be formally identified by psychologists for another century. The members had been systematically stripped of their identities, separated from outside support systems, and subjected to alternating reward and punishment that created powerful trauma bonds with their abusers. The official investigation concluded that the Blackwood family had operated a criminal enterprise at New Harmony from approximately 1842 until their disappearance in 1872. Their crimes included murder, fraud, forgery, human trafficking, and systematic psychological abuse. But despite extensive searches and investigations across the United States and beyond, no member of the Blackwood family was ever located or brought to justice. The remaining settlement members were gradually relocated to other Quaker communities where they received psychological support and spiritual counseling. Most never fully recovered from their experiences, carrying the psychological scars of systematic abuse for the rest of their lives. Their stories, though fragmented by trauma, provided crucial insights into the Blackwood family's methods and motivations. New Harmony itself was abandoned and eventually demolished. The land where the settlement once stood was purchased by a private owner who allowed the forest to reclaim the property. Today, only foundation stones and the overgrown cemetery remain as physical evidence of what occurred there. The official case file remains classified by the Commonwealth of Virginia, with access restricted to senior law enforcement officials and academic researchers with special clearance. The story of New Harmony and the Blackwood family raises disturbing questions about the nature of evil and the vulnerability of even the most idealistic communities to corruption. How could a family maintain a secret criminal enterprise for 30 years while maintaining a flawless public reputation as model citizens and spiritual leaders? What psychological mechanisms enabled them to control hundreds of people through manipulation rather than physical restraint? And most haunting of all, what became of the Blackwood family after their disappearance, and did they continue their crimes elsewhere under different identities? The answers to these questions may never be known. But the story of New Harmony serves as a permanent warning about the dangers of unchecked authority, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the human capacity for evil when morality becomes separated from power. In the quiet valleys of Virginia, the ruins of New Harmony stand as silent testament to a horror that official records still refuse to acknowledge, and a mystery that time has not yet solved.